All right, so welcome to Tuesday. Hopefully, yesterday you got familiar with how class is going to run, how the exam is going to look, and today is going to be the first day that we really start into the AP European content. So, the first thing I want to introduce to you today under the Tuesday folder is where it says Socrative. Anytime it says Socrative, you are going to go to the Socrative website and take a little mini quiz for me. Usually, these are just going to be participation based. I will tell you specifically if the one that you're doing is going to be graded like for an actual grade. This one is not. This one is strictly for participation and also what I'm going to be checking to mark you here today. So what you do is you go to this website, socrative.com. You'll go hit login and you'll hit student login. After you hit student login, obviously wait for it to load. And this link right here, it works for me half the time and the other half it doesn't. So you might need to actually type in Socrative like I did up here. So student login, the first thing it's going to ask you for is the room name. So the room name is not going to change all year. The room name is always going to be Weaver, my last name, 8556. So that is going to be the room name all year. If you ever log in and like the questions seem like they're for another class or they don't make sense to you, that's because you logged in not during your actual class. This Socrative will not be live until your actual class time begins. So make sure that you're taking this during the actual class time, or else you're going to be taking something completely wrong. Again, Weaver 8556, hit join, and now this is where you enter your name. So I'd like you to do last name first, followed by your first name, just because it's easier for me to take attendance that way when they go in alphabetical order. So Weaver Stephen is what I would do. So please make sure to put it in that way. Hit done, and it will take you to a quiz. And you can see the class name room here at the top. What is part one of the AP Euro exam? And then hopefully from yesterday, you can remember it. So I'm going to like you should pause the video right here and actually go take the Socrative, because this next part I'm going to do is going to walk you through the correct answers of this. Normally I won't do it, but I want to talk about this just to make sure that everyone has it. So pause this video, go take the Socrative. Remember, this one isn't for a grade, it's for participation, which is why I'm walking you through the right answers now by video. So what is part one of the AP Euro exam? The answer is multiple choice. There's 55 questions for 55 minutes. Question two, how many multiple choice are there on the exam? Just said 55. Correct answer, cool. And this is so what's going to look like as you go through. How many SAQs or short answer questions are there? Now, if you're wondering, Mr. Weaver, I have no idea what you're talking about. I explained all of this in my opening video from yesterday. So if you didn't watch yesterday's video, go back and do that now. So this stuff makes a little bit of sense. This one is there are 3 questions with 3 parts each. So really 9 short questions. What is the last part of the exam? This one always gets me because I get it messed up between the LEQ and DBQ. The LEQ is the last part, and it'll tell you if you're correct, and if not, it'll say incorrect, and it'll show you the correct answer. How long do you have to write your DBQ? So you have 60 minutes to write your DBQ. I'm going to put 45 minutes just to show you what it looks like when you get one wrong. It'll say incorrect and then repeat the question and give you the correct answer. So if you see incorrect, it'll always give you the right answer. Please don't hit back. That'll just take you out of the whole quiz, and it'll show me that you only finished a certain percent of it. How long do you have for your LEQ? That's 40 minutes. What year does period 3 start? So hopefully you remember the periods 1, 2, 3, and 4 from yesterday. Period 3 starts in the year 1815. Period 1 ends in 1648. Have you installed Kami and familiarized yourself with it? Hopefully by now you have, so I'm going to mark yes. Have you signed up for AP Classroom and joined my class? Hopefully you've also done that, as I went over in the opening video. Yes. If you're learning from home on a certain day, when do you need to check in or complete the work? Question is, during the time I have AP Euro, which is when you should be watching this video and also completing the Socrative. How many different time periods make up this class? It's 4. And we'll be going through all of those in detail. So when I say Socrative, this is what it's going to look like. Remember, I got the one wrong. It tells you your percent and your score at the end. Cool. And then you're done. So if you try to get into this when it's not your class period, it might let you take some kind of quiz, but it's not going to be the right one for your class. So please don't log on and take it until class actually starts. So I'm going to get out of there. And you can see after that, we have a PowerPoint. So I'm going to open up the PowerPoint right here, and it's exactly the same as the one posted. The first topic of this class is the Italian Renaissance. Now, you should have learned about the Renaissance a little bit last year. Renaissance means rebirth, and kind of like, a rebirth of knowledge and information that's going to take place in Italy from the Middle Ages. So we'll get into that, but before that, we'll go through a little bit of background information. So here's your objective for today. I'm going to try and have an objective and an objective scale every day for you to kind of give yourself an idea about how well you're doing and getting the information that I want you to have. So my objective is that by the end of this video and by the end of your assignments, you will be able to use the comparison skill. Now, we haven't talked about the skill, but this is an AP Euro skill of comparing two different things. Comparison doesn't only mean differences, but it means similarities and differences. So students will be able to use the comparison skill to determine the similarities and differences between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. And then I create this little scale. If you're at a 1, you're unable to explain any differences or similarities between the two. If you're at a 2 in the middle, you're able to explain at least some differences or some similarities between the Renaissance, but not really both and not really in detail. And if you fully kind of master it for the day, a 3, student is able to explain both specific similarities and differences between the Middle Ages and Renaissance in detail. So at the end of this, at the end of your Machiavelli sheet that we're going to do at the very end, I want you to put one of those numbers to rate yourself and where you think you are. Now, this is just for me to kind of give me a heads up about how well that you did with today's assignment and how well you're internally processing it. No one's going to be a 3 every day. It's okay if you're at a 1 sometimes, but it's important that I know that so we can try to, simplify things and catch you up a little bit. So before we talk about the Italian Renaissance, we have to talk about the time periods leading up to the Italian Renaissance, the Middle Ages. So the Middle Ages describe Europe between the fall of the Roman Empire in 476 and the beginning of the Renaissance in the 14th century. So you have almost 1,000 years here in between of the dark or Middle Ages, where most people lived on manors, feudalism. You should have learned about that last year. Now, technically, this class starts around the year 1450, so you don't really need to know anything about the Roman Empire or the Middle Ages in too much detail, but it is important to understand how the Renaissance is going to be this change or rebirth of ideas. So this period in Europe was dominated by the power of the Catholic Church and feudalism and manors, a lord and the nobles that had basically just peasant agriculture underneath them. The church had a lot of control. Also, the Crusades. The Catholic Church began to authorize knights and military expeditions or crusades to take Jerusalem back from the Holy Land. The reason this is important because as people start to travel away from their manors where they've never been before, they start to realize all the cool stuff that exists in different parts of the world, and this starts to increase a lot of trade. Crusaders who wore the red crosses on their coats to advertise their status. Basically, the Pope said all of your sins will be forgiven and you are going to go to heaven as long as you go and fight to try and take back the Holy Land. And at this super religious time, it was widely believed, and therefore, if you were willing to go die for God, that was a very noble thing that you could do. We're going to be talking a lot about different religious beliefs throughout this. So it's important to keep in mind that I'm not telling you my religious beliefs, but instead explaining to you how things were seen at that time. And last but not least is the Black Death, the bubonic plague, which I'm sure you all have heard of, a disease that spread from Asia along the Silk Road to Europe, kill over 20 million people, 30% of Europe's population. In cities were really the worst hit because you had so many people that were living together in close quarters. People weren't really bathing, not washing their hands. They didn't have a lot of different medicine. So this is going to spread like wildfire and kill a lot of people. So just some Middle Ages word association. Manors are like the big farms with the church and a market where people lived. Most people during the age of the Middle Ages really never left their farms, and the system was called feudalism. It was completely male-dominated. Religion, the Catholic Church had control over pretty much everybody. Most of the people were peasants, peasant agriculture, which is basically just growing enough to survive, plus what you paid to your noble for letting them use the land. and there's going to be a significant decrease in population, especially as we get to the bubonic plague. Now, the decrease in population was actually good for the people that weren't killed by the plague because it made wages go up. Think about it. If you have 1,000 people going for that same job, wherever you're working can offer you as low of salary as they want, because if you say no, the next person's going to. But when so many people died, there was a lot fewer workers, and therefore workers could demand more money, and some of them used it to kind of elevate their status. So the Italian Renaissance is where we really begin talking about the content for this class. So 1450 is the start date. And I just kind of want you to think about, what did Italy look like in 1450? So these are all really just kind of general things to kind of paint the picture of what Italy looks like around this time. So when we think of Italy, hopefully you should think of like independent city states, where Italy was not a country at this point in 1450. It was a bunch of different city states, Venice, Florence, Milan, those different places that all ruled independently from each other. So wealthy rulers and merchants, people that sold things, had a lot of influence in their states and became patrons of the art, government, and education. So basically, they became really wealthy due to Italy's geographic position. That's just a fancy word of saying location. They were in the middle of Eurasian trade routes, which means between Europe and Asia, that basically made them the middleman of trade. Because of that, a lot of people in Italy were able to get rich. And as they became rich, they started paying for things like artwork. They started to want an influence in the government to match their wealth. And it allowed more people to become educated. Now, keep in mind, most people in Italy were still rural, peasant agriculture farmers. This is more, the Renaissance really only applies to, now in broad terms, of course, there's always exceptions. People that lived in urban or city areas, uh, men for the most part, and really only society's elite. If you were to go ask a majority of the population in Italy in 1450 if they were experiencing a Renaissance, it really wouldn't look that different than the previous hundreds and hundreds of years of time. So the Ottoman Turks conquered Constantinople in 1453, which kind of brought an end to the Byzantine Empire. This hurt Italian trade in independent city states, because now that it was controlled by Muslim or Islamic people, they weren't able to trade as freely. There was a lot more taxes on things, and you had to worry about your things being stolen, because religion is a super divider between people back then, even more than it is today. So because of that, Italian city-states began kind of warring against each other because they lost a lot of their wealth, so they were looking to expand and take away their neighbors' wealth. So oftentimes they would ally against each other, then later fight against each other. You really don't need to memorize any alliances or anything like that in Italy around this time, but they started to go seek outside European powers for help, for bigger countries like France under, I should say, Francis I and Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Now, when I say Holy Roman Emperor, he's in charge of the Holy Roman Empire, which is basically just modern day German areas. But during this time, it was like 300 independent different little states and cities, all ruled by somebody else. The Holy Roman Empire is a lie. It's not holy, it's not Roman, and it's not an empire. The Holy Roman Emperor technically was the overseer of all of it, but really he wasn't. He ruled in name and had an army, but he was only supported by people that agreed with him, and there was many people in the Holy Roman Empire that did not. So, like I said, as we go back to Italy, each state had different leaders. Some had some type of republic and senate voting. Some had an oligarchy, which is basically a group of wealthy people that control the government. It's in the hands of a few. And some had a monarch or a pope, if you're talking about the papal states. So what's going to start the quote unquote Renaissance is the rediscovery of classical Greek and Roman texts that had been missing for hundreds or even 1,000 years, that is going to bring this new literary movement to Italy known as humanism. Humanism is the most important word of the Renaissance, and we'll get into that in more detail when we get there. The major things you need to take away from this slide are knowing that the Renaissance is going to start in Italy because of its geographic position, made a lot of people wealthy because of trade. They use that wealth to inspire art, take control of government, and increase education. And knowing that the rediscovery of classical Greek and Roman text is really going to be the momentum behind the Renaissance. People are going to be reading these old books but are new to them. And the Greeks and Romans, these texts, a lot of them are written before the founding of Christianity. Remember, we talked about in the Middle Ages that Christianity was the most powerful thing. It was in every part of life. So now that you have these books that talk about life with no Christianity, people became and started to question the information they thought they knew and started to study things and look at things other than just God. So as we continue on, we're going to look at the rebirth of the classics and how that's going to shape Italy. Okay, so the rebirth of the classics. I'm going to try and hide my face down here over here on this picture here. So in the Middle Ages, kings, nobles, peasants were local, uncentralized. When you see uncentralized, what that means is that there wasn't one powerful person that ruled over everything. It was more localized into manners, and whoever ruled that manor really had control over the people. And they lived in service and fear of the Catholic Church and the Pope. The most important people during the Middle Ages was the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope, because your life on earth was kind of seen as unimportant and just preparing you for the afterlife. So you can see why people thought the church was so important. So everything in the Middle Ages revolved around God and church. Education, you only really learned about, your job, which for most people was farming, and about religion and fearing God and heaven and hell and those types of things. The celebration, wars, medicine, laws, pretty much everything that was created and used was about religion. However, during Islamic expansion, during the Crusades, the Mongols, and Italian trade, they all, in Italy, all of these old books by the Romans and Greeks started to be rediscovered. They were preserved very well by Muslim scholars. And people, for the first time for hundreds, like I said, almost 1,000 years, are going to be reading these books, which brings into the question of what life was like before God and how these people lived. So coming into the Italian city-states in Europe in the 14th century, they're going to start not only rediscovering, but also using this classical knowledge from the Greek and the Romans. This is a picture that I showed you about your quiz that you're going to take tomorrow too, knowing these different places. This is roughly what Europe looked like at this point in time. A lot of people living at this time didn't see themselves as part of the country of France. They see themselves as different sections of France and so forth. We talked about the Italian city-states, but it's good to know, and you can see here between the Ottoman Empire and Asia versus Europe over here, you have the Italian middlemen that are in the middle, which is why their geographic location is so important to making them rich and why the Renaissance is going to start here. The five major Italian city-states are right here, Florence being the most important. Florence is going to be run by a family called the Medicis. They are pretty much ones that ran the government, wealthy merchants and bankers that are going to make a lot of money and pretty much rule Florence for decades. And you can see all the other ones here. They make their money off of trade, wool, and some manufacturing as well. And this right here, I just said just a map of trade routes throughout the rest of Europe after things came in to Italy. The Medici, like I said, the really powerful family in Italy that's going to control banking and make a lot of money and basically control the city-state of Florence. And the Fugger family did the same thing, but up in more German areas. The Medicis are much, much more well known. So this new old knowledge, and you have a picture of someone named Petrarch up here, and this is Machiavelli down here. So there are three primary writers that are really going to emphasize these new old models of thought. Now, they're new because they're new to people living in this time period, but remember, it's old because it's coming from classical Greek and Roman times. So Petrarch, Machiavelli, and Bruni are three important names that you really need to know. I would say right here is probably where you want to actually going back. This page right here, and I probably should have said this at the beginning, is really where your notes begin to start to become important. So again, you don't need to copy every single one of these bullet points down specifically, but like I said, I'd like you to keep a handwritten notebook that I'll collect once every 10 weeks or have you send me pictures of once every 10 weeks, because it really, really helps to write this stuff down as you're going. You can always go back and write it down later. It doesn't have to be during this exact time. And remember, you don't have to write every single thing down. You can summarize and really focus on the important things. And I'll try to point that out as we go through. So Petrarch, Machiavelli, and Bruni are three people that you really need to know. One of the things that changes after like rediscovering these books is education. Hopefully, you can remember the two things that the Middle Age focused on the most, which was just your trade or job, and theology, which is the study of religion. But that's going to change in the Renaissance. Once the Renaissance began, people like Petrarch are going to read, study these classics, and change education and what people studied. Petrarch is known as the father of the Renaissance, father of humanism in some cases, because he's one of the very first people to do it. So classical writings and educations were based on being well-rounded in a lot of different things: art, philosophy, science, language, history, literature, music, all of these things, not just profession-based. Like in the Middle Ages, if you were a shoemaker, you would only know really making shoes. If you were a farmer, you'd really only know farming, and so forth. But these old Greek ideas were about being well-rounded in the humanities, hence the word humanism. And that's why you have humanities courses today. We learn English, where you look at a lot of literature. You have music classes, you have art classes, you have history classes that you're taking right here. And this really all begins starting in the Renaissance. So you can see how it still affects, however many 100 years later, what you're doing in class right now. So humanism. Writers like Petrarch, who was the father of the Renaissance, were influenced by these texts and their emphasis on real life and regular life, not religion. Now, remember, in the Middle Ages, everybody was super God fearing. Religion was the most important thing. Your life was only preparing you for the afterlife. Humanism in the Renaissance is going to challenge that. Since Greek and Roman writers were before Christianity, topics and life were not determined by behaving or acting Christian. So imagine your entire life, you grow up only learning these Christian ideas, and your entire way of life is around Christianity. Then you start to read these books about life that don't even mention Christianity, and yet the people are functioning as a society and so forth. People began to question things they thought they knew. Classical writers and knowledge were far more focused on life and power of the individual in developing a well rounded set of knowledge and skills. So during the Middle Ages, it was seen as sinful to be full of yourself, to focus on yourself. You should be focusing on God. Any artwork, anything that was created was meant to bring glory to God, not the individual, because in the Middle Ages, the individual was insignificant. The emphasis on being well-rounded in multiple subjects is referred to humanism, or the study of the humanities. Again, all the different things we just named: art, philosophy, history, literature, music, dancing, being very well-rounded, which is where the term Renaissance man comes from. So skepticism. As people began to question things they thought they knew, they became a skeptic. Having a skeptical attitude, doubt something is truthful. People began to question the way society ran, which is why this is going to be a rebirth so far of the way society works. Humanist writing. So Renaissance humanism not only changed education, but it also affected literature, art, politics, and governments. Traditionally, most things during the Middle Ages, all songs, stories, poems, were based on God or some invincible godlike hero that usually had a quest from God or something like that. Petrarch is going to dismiss the idea of these perfect human people, or that Christian morality. Instead, he's going to focus on moral issues of regular everyday life. In a little bit, you're going to read through some of his sonnets. His sonnets they do mention God. The important thing to keep in mind is that just because the Renaissance is going to start to focus on things other than God does not mean religion does not play a huge role. So remember, religion is still a major part of these people's lives. They're just starting to look at other things too. He's going to write of love, hate, admiration, sadness, painting a realistic picture of what life is really like. We've all felt all of these emotions before. So why do these stories from the Middle Ages not include that? Why are the Middle Ages only about God and these godlike heroes? We should have literature that reflects our feelings and everyday people and what they normally look like. Another person is Giovanni Boccaccio, who's going to write a book that you definitely need to know called The Decameron. Basically, it's a bunch of short stories. I believe there's 100 stories in there, told by several. I think it's actually seven different types of people during the plague. So basically, his story takes place. There's people hiding in this village during when the plague is going on, and they're like waiting for it to pass altogether. So they tell stories about their past and each other's life and so forth, to pass the time. In his stories, Boccaccio describes the moral dilemmas that people have to face as prostitutes, criminals, regular people, and these people that weren't perfect. So, for the first time in 1,000 years, regular people were starting to be written about. And that might not seem like a major development. Most of the things we write today are about people, not about God in the afterlife. But you have to remember, it goes from every single piece of literature being developed from this time about religion to now focusing on individual people. Gutenberg's printing press. So this is a little out of place, but it's important to know. The reason these ideas are going to spread so much during the Renaissance is because of Gutenberg's printing press. I'm sure you've already heard of this from Global 9. Just movable type that allowed works to be copied faster. There's usually questions in some regard, about the printing press on your test. It's going to increase literacy rates because more people were able to get access for things to read. It's going to help spread the Renaissance and Protestant Reformation, which we'll get to a little bit later with Martin Luther. And it's going to promote the growth of vernacular languages. Vernacular languages are languages that common languages that people speak in an area. Ours is clearly English. In Italy, it would be Italian. In France, French, and so forth. During the Middle Ages, really the only things that were written down, again, were by the church or for church-like things. Therefore, it was done in Latin because Latin is traditionally uh, the church's language that they write in. So this brings us to worksheet. The first thing I'm going to have you do, and if you go to the Schoology page, you should see this pop up under Petrarch Sonnets. So what you're going to do is you're going to read through his different sonnets. He's going to write about a woman. Her name is Laura. I'm not going to tell you too much about it because I want you to kind of make some predictions based on the readings. But I'd like you to go through and answer these questions. It doesn't have to be super long answers, but they should be complete sentences, always complete sentences in here. When it asks for the audience of the poem, that means who is it written for? Why is he like every single thing has been written for someone else to read? Who is this for? So I'd like you to go through and answer those questions and submit it on Schoology before you continue on with this lecture and going through. The next person that we mentioned that we're going to continue talking about is Machiavelli. Probably most of you have heard of Machiavelli. It's better to be feared than loved and those type of expressions. But he's going to take these Renaissance ideas and turn them more political. So when people started to focus on the individual and a break from the importance of theology, which again means religion, thinkers began to question how governments were operated. One of these first Renaissance thinkers, as we said, was Machiavelli, who came from war-torn Italian city-states. Remember, we said as trade broke down, city-states began fighting each other, and we'll get more into that a little bit later. In the Middle Ages, politics were ruled by the idea that a king, prince, noble should rule as a just and moral Christian, following the Ten Commandments, following the rules set in the Bible, and so forth. Machiavelli argued that that's ineffective, that an effective ruler is going to do whatever means necessary to obtain and run a kingdom. So again, by whatever means necessary, if being a good Christian ruler isn't working, put the hammer down. Do what you need to do to keep your city successful and in line. And of course, the better to be feared than loved quote. In his book, The Prince, Machiavelli outlined that in politics, anything goes. You can be just, you can be unjust, you can be cruel, you can be violent, brutal, you can be loving, as long as it works. This book is specifically dedicated to Lorenzo the Magnificent, or Lorenzo Medici. He was running Florence during the time, and he thought Lorenzo Medici was this wonderful ruler that really wanted to take tighter control to save Italy from all this war torn that it was going through. So again, keep in mind, people always have these negative things about Machiavelli because he says it's okay to be violent. He also has another quote that goes, and I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head. If you need to be violent or cruel, be it all at once and then never again. He thought if someone was too brutal or a bad ruler, that eventually people would rise up and overthrow. So while he says do whatever is necessary, he said it shouldn't, like, there's a difference between that and being a violent, terrible ruler. This brings us to the second worksheet, which is Machiavelli's The Prince. So it has different outlines from his book that I want you to read to get a better idea of who Machiavelli was and what his ideas were. When it says purpose here for these quotes, everything that has ever been written or created has been created for a reason. The purpose of me putting together this worksheet is for you to learn about Machiavelli's ideas, to do well in your AP exam. So what is Machiavelli's purpose for these quotes up here? Why did he write those? And again, audience, which we already explained in the previous video. The last couple things I'm going to talk about today, and this lecture ran a little bit long. It won't be this long every time, so I apologize. Still getting used to this just like you are. The word individualism. Now, we've talked about how in the Renaissance there's going to be more of a focus on the individual. The idea so individualism is another ism, just like humanism, that's going to play a major role in Italian Renaissance. It basically is that the individual is worthy of things. It says that you are a person, your accomplishments are important, how you feel is important. Just because you're not godlike doesn't mean you're not worthy of art and literature and poetry, etc. It said life on earth is worth living and not to be completely focused on the afterlife. Life was so bad for these peasants that, like, they saw it as just a waiting period to get into heaven. Individualism in the Renaissance challenges that idea and says, no, life is worth living. Heaven is important, religion's important, yes, but your life on earth isn't important too. And this idea of virtue, this also comes from Machiavelli. Virtue is the ability to act decisively and heroically for the good of their country. Now, this doesn't always mean doing the right thing, but doing whatever is necessary in order to keep things going. There's another term for this called realpolitik that we'll talk about literally 100 years from now when we get to people like Otto von Bismarck. So just you won't remember that when we get there, but that's okay. A couple other people we're going to talk about before we go. Pico della Mirandola. He is going to write Oration on the Dignity of Man. This book is important because it emphasizes that humans can achieve great things and that we're made in God's image. Basically, during the Middle Ages, people were taught that humans are insignificant. Your life doesn't matter. It's about praising God. You're sinful. You're a bad person no matter what you do. But Mirandola is going to change that and basically say, no, we're made in God's image. We have the choice of flying with angels or being with the animals, lying with the pigs. So this book is important because it focuses on individual and achievements and saying that you're worthy of great things and you should create these great things because you're made in God's image. So again, see, it's not turning away from religion, but it's showing that other things besides just God and religion are important. The next person, Lorenzo Valla. He's another Italian. All these people we're talking about are Italian humanists that are going to study the classic. He is going to analyze something called the Donation of Constantine. And basically what this was is the Catholic Church claimed that Emperor Constantine from the Roman Empire going all the way back gave the church this huge amount of lands. So he's going to go through and study this language, this literature, like a humanist would. And he's basically going to expose that wasn't from Constantine, that it was actually written hundreds of years after Constantine was living, and it was created by the Catholic Church to give themselves access to that lands. Now, you might say, how can someone know that? Just by studying the language. Imagine if we were talking about the 17th century and you opened your textbook and it said, 18th century, and said, George Washington said, hey, what's up, bro? They didn't talk like that at the time. They didn't write like that at the time. So you can recognize by studying the language when something was written, and he proved that this was a forgery. Now, besides this, he's not like some of the other people we're going to talk about. Even though he exposed this kind of accidentally, he's still going to remain a loyal and good Catholic. He's going to be a bishop later in his life. But again, it creates skepticism among people to question the things that they've been told by the church for so long. The last person we're going to look at, Mario Ficino. He's going to translate Plato's works into Latin, giving modern Europeans access to them for the first time. What he did, again, by turning them in, taking them from Greek to Latin, basically Latin, we said, was the written language of the church. More people could read and study these. He attempted to integrate Plato's work into Christianity. Now, Plato was a great philosopher from ancient Greece. Christianity didn't exist then. This guy argued that it's not their fault they didn't know God didn't exist. Like, that was just the way that things went. Jesus wasn't around, all those other things. So he is saying that this is what Plato would believe, and this is how it fits with Christianity. So again, you can see that he's trying to hold on to the importance of the church while still being a humanist, because he's combining it with these new Greek ideas from a long time ago. So what? Last slide. I believe in you. You got this far. What do all these people have in common that we just talked about? They're all Renaissance humanists that promoted a revival in classic literature and created new philosophical approaches to ancient texts. These Renaissance humanists furthered the values of secularism and individualism. Secularism is the separation of church and state. It doesn't get rid of religion. It just basically says that government should run separate of religious ideas. Machiavelli really has a role in that, but also individualism, with Boccaccio focusing on the stories of regular people. Mirandola focusing that individuals are made in God's image and are capable of these great things. Again, they're not all secularists. Like Lorenzo Valla, he's still a major Catholic his entire life, but they're all Italian humanists that are going to study these ancient works and promote this new style of humanist or well-rounded education. So again, this video went a little bit longer than what I planned it. So for this day, you should have completed the Socrative to start, went through this PowerPoint video with me, submitted the Petrarch Sonic sheet, and Machiavelli the Prince. This might be a little bit longer than 40 minutes, so you might have a little bit of homework to do, but I'll do my best going forward in the future to keep this kind of trimmed down a little bit. If you have any questions, please message me on Schoology, and I look forward to either seeing you tomorrow in class or hearing from you in a Schoology message or meeting with you on Zoom soon. Thank you so much.